Hello, my name is Marian Petrov and I'm Grandmaster from Bulgaria. Today I would like to show you one very interesting story, which is the story of one of the most exciting lines in the King's Gambit. And you will see the story through the eyes of two of the greatest players at that period. Adolf Andersen, who was probably the best player in the world in the 1860s, and Johannes Zukertort, also one of the best players. In this year, 1865, they have played a match between them, and the interesting thing about this match is that they have played the same line in many games with both colors, with white and with black, and this was the line in the King's Gambit. After e4, e5, f4, pawn takes, knight f3. Now black is playing probably the best move, g5. And nowadays, most people prefer here h4 for white, and the game is very complicated. But at the time, bishop c4 was, of course, the most natural move to develop the bishop on c4 on this diagonal, to castle, and even in many occasions, white was quite happy to sacrifice the bishop on f7 and to open the f-file. Now black has many possibilities. He can play d6, bishop g7, even h6. But one of the most interesting moves is g4, because now the point is that white has a choice, of course. He can play knight e5, which looks extremely strong, as it is attacking the pawn on f7 and the pawn on g4. But now after queen h4 check, the problem is that white has to play the king to f1. And then black has various moves. He can actually give this pawn, but I think if he simply plays knight h6, he has a very good game, because now in many occasions he will play f3. Let's say if you play d4, d6, and now knight d3, he can play now f3. If you take, he takes with the pawn, then the bishop comes as well here, bishop h3, rook g8, and suddenly it might turn out that the white king is more exposed than the black one. So what to do? After g4, one of the main possibilities is to castle, which happened in this game. In the game which I am showing you now, Zukertort was white and Andersen is with black. Now black takes, and white takes with the queen. There was also a line in which white was playing bishop f7, but it turned out that this is actually not so good for white. Of course, there has been many games, and now queen f3, but usually black was able to defend his king. So a bit more modest is maybe to sacrifice only one piece instead of two. So queen f3, and now already, if black makes some mistake, white wants to take on f7 with the bishop, and then queen f4, etc. So there are few possibilities for black, and probably the best move is queen f6, which has been played in all these games, which we will see. Now, of course, black is quite happy to exchange the queens, and for white it doesn't make sense to take queen f4, rook f4, because it will be endgame with the piece down. So he has to find some way to continue his attack. He can try, of course, d3, because black also, now he wants to give this check queen d4, and then this will be check, of course, and he wants to take the bishop. And the best move here for white is e5. This is a very common idea in all those open positions where the black king is on e8, because in order to attack this king in the center, you have to open the files against him. And in particular, you have to open the e file. So actually, you don't need this pawn. It is better to open the file. And black, I think he is more or less obliged to take this pawn, because otherwise, if he plays queen g5 or queen h6, white will simply play d4, and then knight c3 is coming, knight e4, bishop f4, etc. White will have a very strong attack. So black has to take. And he still wants to deliver this check, so there is no time for knight c3 or d4. white has to play d3. Now the idea of white is to take this pawn with the bishop on f4, and without this pawn, then it will be very dangerous for the black king because the f5 will be totally open, and there are various possibilities to sacrifice the bishop on f7 and then to bring the bishop to give some check from e5, g5 or h6. So I think black has to do something in order to protect his pawn, and he usually plays bishop to h6. This is probably the best move to defend the pawn. Now again, white has to play the knight because bishop f4 is leading to lost endgame, knight c3. And now already white wants to play moves like bishop takes f4 maybe, and then rook e1 to take the queen, which is on the same file with the king. So black was playing usually the move knight to e7 to close the file, and now he simply wants to maybe to castle or to play knight c6 or even c6, d5 and knight g6 to move the queen. So basically, if you give time to black to develop his pieces, he needs maybe 2 or 3 moves, the game will be totally winning for black, because he will keep his extra piece without big compensation. So white has to play bishop to d2, and now he is preparing rook e1, and this pin looks very dangerous. And if you remember in the beginning, I told you that this is an interesting story. It's not only one game, because in this match, which was played in Breslau, there were at least 3 games in this position. In some of them, Andersen was playing with white, actually in 2 of these games, and in the game which we now see, Zukertort was playing with white. So in this game, Andersen opted for the move pawn to c6. But this is not the main line. The main line was played in the other 2 games, and this is the move knight b to c6, which is probably the best move for black. So this is interesting why Andersen decided to deviate from this option. Now let's take a look how did he try to attack in this line when he was playing with white. He went rook e1, which seems like the most natural move. And now the best move for black is not to give check from d4 or c5, but he has to play queen f5, because the important thing for black is to keep the f file closed and to not allow white to take bishop f4, queen f4 without exchanging the queens, because then it will be very difficult to hold the f-pawn. Now white has to play knight d5. This is the most aggressive move, attacking the pawn on c7, and of course preparing some bishop c3 or bishop b4, using the pin on the e-file. Black has to play the king to d8. And in this line there has been many games, actually, of course, and white has 2 main ideas, bishop c3 or queen e2. Queen e2 is maybe the best move, although if black finds the best defense, he is not in trouble. Now white is attacking the knight. So if black takes, white should take on d5. And if queen takes on d5, then white is playing bishop to c3 with the idea to deliver bishop f6, checkmate, and of course he's attacking the rook. So there is no time for rook g8, rook f8, knight d4 is not working because queen e7 checkmate. And of course black can defend with bishop g5 maybe, then white can take the rook, and this is very unclear line. Or even actually most of the time after queen e2, black goes queen to e6, because he is quite happy to exchange the queens when he has extra piece. But now white can play queen f2, for example, to attack the queen, and if black goes queen f5, he can play again queen e2 and try to repeat and to make a draw. Of course, at this time in 1860s, when people were sacrificing pieces, it was not with the intention to try to make a draw. So in these two games, after king to d8, Andersen has played the move bishop to c3. And then it's funny that until the 20th move, Zukertort has repeated the moves in 2 games on a row. Now he has maybe only one good move, rook e8. Here, in this line, white have tried as well the moves like bishop f6, queen to knight f6. Andersen went for knight f6, which is not one of the best lines for white, because now black has actually plenty of possible moves. Even he can play d6 maybe, and after knight takes, king takes e8, and then he can close the file with the bishop on e6. But of course more natural is to defend the rook, which happened in both games. And now after g4, this actually reminds me a little bit of one other very famous game of Andersen, the Immortal game, in which also there was a black pawn on f4 and the queen in this area, and he went g4 and h4. Maybe you remember this game. Queen to g6. Now again the same idea, h4. And basically white wants to play now maybe g5 and then to take finally this pawn in order to activate his queen and the rook. But after d6, black has a good position, I think. Andersen has played g5 in both games, and even if now, of course, white cannot win the bishop immediately because of the pin, in both cases Zukertort went back with the bishop immediately to make some space for the h-pawn. And after queen takes f4, h6 was played in both games, and after queen h2, now Zukertort has many possibilities here, and I don't know exactly what was his idea to play a6, but a6 is okay, a normal move, it's not a mistake. Maybe he wants to play b5 and to attack the bishop, and then b4 to chase down both bishops. And now here there was the deviation. In one of the games, Andersen has played d4. And now black took on g5. So it seems like white has a very strong attack, but actually the black king is defended very well. And I'm not sure exactly that white has enough compensation. Here he went d5. Now black even found time to give this check with the queen. King to h1. And in this position, now black is a piece up and even 2 pawns. Of course, white has some activity, especially the rooks are very active, and the knight on f6 is a bit annoying. And probably Zukertort thought that there is no danger at all for his king. He could have played basically any move is okay for him. But he has made the worst possible move. And with this move, the game has become very, very famous. And this is probably one of the most beautiful, although not so difficult combinations of Adolf Andersen. Here in the game was knight to b8. Which turned out to be a huge mistake. Why? Because now suddenly Andersen cannot miss move like queen takes d6, because if pawn takes, there is this very nice checkmate, bishop a5, b6, bishop b6, checkmate. So in the game, after queen d6, black went bishop d7, but after queen e7 here, Zukertort has to resign. And I told you that this line was played in 2 occasions. In the next game, actually it was funny that Andersen has switched the move. He didn't play d4, but he played b4 this time. And after b5, bishop b3, Zukertort now continue with this aggressive move f5, a5. Now white actually doesn't have too many possibilities. He took on a5, but after b4, bishop b2, black has managed to activate his rook, and after rook a5, he's attacking the pawn on g5, and the game went rook e2. White wanted to double the rooks on the e file, bishop to b7, now rook to g2, but the bad thing for white is that he doesn't have any threats, and after rook f5, more or less everything is over for white. He is just a piece down without any attack. Even actually black has now the initiative, and after pawn takes, the game is finished in a few moves here. Zukertort has decided to sacrifice his queen. He took on f6, and after pawn takes g6, he took on b2. So he has now plenty of pieces for his queen, 3 pieces, and he has very active bishops and knight as well. Knight e5 is threat, knight d4 as well, g7, simply rook g8, and then bishop g7 is not working. So Andersen went rook g4. It is not clear exactly what is the idea, maybe because bishop d4 was very, very annoying check, and then knight e5, and on both diagonals the king will suffer a lot. So he has to now give up his rook, and this was actually the end of the game. Now knight f3 is coming. After rook e3, black simply took here. Now rook f1, checkmate is coming. So that's how you see that this line is very interesting, and one game Andersen has lost, the other he won. And we will continue in our next video with the game between Zukertort and Andersen.